Going. Thanks again so much for joining us, and welcome to the Personalize Your Customer's Experience webinar. If you saw something saying value-added services, I apologize, that's not right. You are in the correct place. This is the Customer Experience webinar. My name again is Paul Sims. I'm chairman at Eyeforpharma, and obviously I'm really delighted that you were able to join us today. And as you can see from the slide in front of you, today we are four ridiculously handsome gentlemen. Well, at least three of them anyway, and all of whom have been very kind to give up their time and talk to us today. So we have Morten at the top there, who's currently in New York, Mike, who's in the UK, and Victor, who is speaking to us from Paris. And what I want to do is I want to say a huge thank you also to the company Morten works for, which is Agnitio. I have to say that Agnitio have been a great partner of Eyeforpharma's. We both started our services around about 2002, 2003. They've been a great support for many years, and once again, they've really delivered in helping to get this webinar organized. So my first question to you all is customer experience important? And one way to perhaps answer that is to let you know that actually we've had a very strong number of people signed up for this webinar. In fact, we've got about 1,300 sign-ups today. So I think that probably shows that it's got a certain degree of popularity, particularly as we only announced it 2 weeks ago. But of course, popularity is not necessarily an indicator of how well we have indeed adopted these things within our companies. And so I think the first thing we're going to do on this webinar is to ask you all of you listening in, a question. Now, if you can imagine, or not imagine, because I'm going to show you a sort of sliding scale. If you look at your screen, you'll see brand focus on the left and customer focus on the right. And I'd just really like to know whereabouts you think you and your company actually sit on this scale at the moment. So are you towards the left or are you towards the right? So if you now look at your screen, we're going to get a poll up and running, which you can answer. Where do you sit on this chart yourself? So let's have a look. So we've got 5 answers there, which obviously range from strongly brand focused to strongly customer focused. So, and if you're speaking from a vendor organization or a consultant, then do try and give us an indication of where you think your average client is, shall we say. Okay, I'm going to hold that poll open for about 3 more seconds. I can see that about 2/3 of you have voted so far. So 3, 2, 1. Thank you very much, everyone. Let's have a look at the results, shall we? Okay, so we've got 15% strongly brand focused, 23%. Speaking about, we're pretty even, aren't we? We've got 27%, the highest amount there on the slightly customer focused, but a good 20% of people believe that their companies are strongly customer focused. I guess that's a sign of some confidence. Let's ask another question if we can. So once again, I'm going to ask you to look at your screens while we put this second poll question up. Okay, so this time I'm asking you how committed your company really is, you and your company really are. How committed are you to actually changing this? So I'm very interested. Don't just speak for yourself, speak for your company if you possibly can, and let us know where you believe that the change is going to come from. So I'm just going to hold that open for another 3 or 4 seconds. So 3, 2, 1. Thank you very much, everybody. Okay, so it looks like we do have a pretty, I guess we're sort of preaching to converted a little bit here, but we do certainly have a lot of people in this room who are trying to make a change. I'm obviously enormously pleased to see that. Let me introduce you to Morten, who is going to give us a short speech. I'm confident most of you already know Morten, and he doesn't really need any great introduction other than to say that I personally consider him a very forward-thinking person And for that reason alone, he's an incredibly valuable asset that we have in the pharmaceutical industry. So I'm going to hand over to Morten now. But before I do, I just want you to make you aware that there's a Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen. So do please ask your questions using this. I'm really hoping that everybody that's on board today is going to ask at least one question over the course of the hour that we've got. And we'll obviously be trying to get to as many of those questions as possible. So we're going to hand over the screen to Morten now, and Morten can take it away.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Paul. Thank Mike. Thank Victor. It's great to be here. It's, of course, it feels a little bit weird that that you got 1,300 people out there and you're sitting by yourself in an office. But I guess that's the future. Okay. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to talk for around 10 minutes. And it's just to warm up, you can say, to kind of set a frame and from somewhere to start the discussing. I've really been looking forward to this discussion. I think what's so exciting about this is I really think big things are happening now, things that we've also been waiting for a long time. And what's so great, I think, is that it's nobody really got the answers, you can say. We can together kind of ask the questions. But we're basically sailing without a chart, and I find that very intriguing, very exciting, and that's also why I hope there's going to be a lot of discussions today, both with the panel and questions from you, the audience. Okay, so just to say a few words, what I see or what I believe is that one of the reasons that there's so much focus on patient centricity now is saying that I think comes as two things. It comes of that we as patients, we want more, we want to be more involved than we are today. That we are no longer, you can say if we're a patient, we are no longer victims of a disease. We are more manager of a treatment. That's one thing. So I think the patients are very important, that what they want to be involved in. And then it's also, I think, from the whole society side that the cost of healthcare is continuing to rise, and we need to get a better outcome. Okay, so starting out with the patient, if we say that, as I said, we used to a few years ago, or when I remember my grandparents, they would be believing so much in the authorities and just listening to the doctor. So the decision in the old days would be that the doctor with a little help from the patient, you can say. So you were maybe informed, and now we're kind of getting completely involved. Now I'm much more looking at it. If I just look at myself, I look much more at it as using people around me as consultants. Maybe or probably the doctor is still a very important player and the most important player, but I'm absolutely looking elsewhere. I'm talking to pharmacists, to relatives, to looking at the pharma companies, and so forth. Why that is of course, obviously, I think it's because that we're better educated. We don't believe in authorities in the same way as we used to, and so forth. But it means that people can't just make a decision over my head anymore. I want to be involved. I had my daughter hospitalized about a year ago. Didn't turn out to be anything serious, but I was obviously constantly looking at the internet and asking the doctors what they were doing, why they were doing it, why they weren't titrating, and so forth. And as the doctor said to him at one point, you know what, I just realized a few years ago I spent a lot of time educating my patients. Now I'm actually doing more of de-educating. Which is also, I think, a big thing. Okay, so that's one thing. The other thing is that is the escalating healthcare cost. That there's enormous focus on, or will be an increasing focus on saying, how do we get more bang for the buck? You can say, how do we get more out of what we're doing? I think this one I stole from a Novo Nordisk presentation, and it just say rules of the half. This isn't within diabetes, but I think it gives a good picture just to set the scene, saying that if we look at diabetes, we know that only about half of the people who got the disease have been diagnosed. Only half of them will be in care. Only half of them will be treated within targets, and only half of them will actually achieve the desired outcome. And that also brings it to saying that the big cost in pharma in healthcare now is really not the drug, it's not the products, it's the managing the disease. It's the poor disease management that costs so much. And I think that's one of the main reasons why this enormous focus is coming now. So if we look at this drawing and we look from left to right, we see, well, ideally, if we look at what the drug could give, ideally in a clinical trial where everything is under control, and then we see a gap or a loss on the right-hand side. But if we look at that loss, I think that way to look at it is to say, well, the drug is one thing, but another thing is, of course, the competences to treat and control, meaning how do we apply it, how do we control it, meaning that, again, that a drug or the outcome will never be any better than how good we are to diagnose, to screen, to titrate, to control, and so forth. And finally, you've got the whole understand and trust, and by that I mean the behavior of the actual patients. And not only the patient, everybody in the journey, you can say. So the way I look at it is saying that, well, the drug is doing what the drug can do, but the big thing that we have to look at is really how do we use it, how do we apply it, how do we keep adherent, and not just patient adherent, but adherent all the way through the treatment. And that really got a lot to do with communication, and that's why it's getting to this personalization, I think. It's really a lot of this, the drug ain't going to do it different. What's going to do it different is the way we communicate it. And I agree with the people, and I know we talked with Mike and Victor about this also, that service, I think communication as a service is going to be a very big thing in pharma. That is where we really can make a difference in the future, is to say how can we help not just delivering a drug, but actually get people to use it in the right way all the way through, which got to do with communication. Other industries have done this, have worked on this, have disrupted, you can say, their communication. If we just look at a few of them, the music industry, the film industry, the travel industry, and so forth. So like the music industry, we all know that, or at least the one who's as old as I am, that we had to go in the old days to a record store to find a record and probably have to buy the whole of it, even though you only wanted one track. And iTunes, Spotify, Pandora, and so forth completely disrupted that. The same happened with the film industry, with the travel industry. But basically what's happening is saying that they're cutting out the middleman, you can say, and they are empowering the people in front and after the one they're cutting out, you can say. So when I travel today, I never use a travel agency anymore, but what they've given me through technology and knowledge and so forth is the opportunity to make decisions myself. I think another industry that's really struggling now is the media, the news media industry. Who got this again huge problem that they are that it's too much of a transaction cost to get to the actual articles you want to get to. Okay, but as I said, what they've done is that they've removed the middleman, and that we really can't, in my view, but this is up to discussion absolutely, to what degree can we do that in the pharma industry. And I don't think we can do that, and I don't think we should do that. The reason for that is that, as I say, I think that a very big part of this is obviously not just the drug, it's how it's being applied, controlled, and so forth. So if we look at the journey all the way through, from if we've got the industry on the left-hand side to the doctor, to the pharmacist, or to whatever, that could be a nurse or relative and so forth, but each one of them, if we talk for the doctor, the pharmacist, the nurse, and so forth, are adding really, really valuable knowledge and information, which will turn into behavior, meaning competences, applying, controlling, educating, and so forth, which will have a direct, or the biggest impact from here on the outcome, I think. That's one thing they give. The other thing they give is the trust, which is where you can say proximity is needed. Is that the patient, me as a patient, I know that if I go to a pharma website, that of course they will be biased. They will be trying to be selling their drug. So I'd rather, as a patient, probably go to Wikipedia, meaning that even if we, or when we go directly to the patients, the trust isn't there. But what I do trust are people who are close to me, people that I believe, meaning that as a patient, I might trust the pharmacist will trust the doctor will trust the rep, and so forth. So I think that I think these middlemen in our industry are not just middlemen, they are absolutely crucial stakeholders in doing this. So what we can do, instead of disrupting the way that the Uber have been doing, removing everything in between the driver and the customer, is that we can optimize in between each of these. So we can make sure that the communication between the doctor and the patient is a lot better, that the communication between the doctor and the pharmacy, between the doctor and the nurse, and so forth, between the rep and the doctor, and so forth. It doesn't have to be, it's just showing here as a linear journey, but of course that could look very, very different. But it's just saying that what we can do is that we can move in between each of these and add value by giving better communication services. The one way to do that when we talk technology, and I think where the technology can help us, is in this empowerment idea. That of course we can use the technology to, whenever it's appropriate and it works, we should of course go directly to the individual stakeholders. But what we can also do with the technology is that we can empower each step on the way with individualized content, or content that he or her can adjust to the next level, meaning that not only giving tools to our rep to go out and talk to a doctor, but actually give the same tools to the doctor and say, now here you've got a repository, together we can put together presentations that you think would benefit and help your patient to better understand and in that way behave differently. Let's put it together, and you can now use it in whatever channel you want to use it. So giving the tools further out to the doctor, to the pharmacist, to the nurse, all the way out to the patient, where they can do co-browsing like we're doing now. They can make microsites, apps, text, mails, brochures, and so forth. But what I'm trying to show here is, of course, that in this industry we do have some constraints in terms of compliance, regulations, and so forth. So it again will have to be kind of in a closed loop, in a way where you got control of the content. But I think that this is a way to go, meaning that we will do you can say a kind of decentralization where we move the decision of what to give to the next level in order to personalize it, move that further downstream, because the only one who really knows what my problem is me, meaning that it's going to be damn difficult to sit from Berlin or New York or London and decide what's important for a doctor in Helsinki. So that's where we see the technology is moving, and that gives a funny thing, because I do see things. I see that on one side you can say that we're seeing a centralization, but we're also seeing a decentralization. And I don't think they're actually contradict each other. I think we need to centralize in order to localize, meaning that in order to really deliver and put together the technology and the content to the right people making microsegmentation or targeting, we need to centralize a lot of things, data, digital content, services, and so forth. But at the same time, we need to give the slack and empower people further downstream, that be reps, that be doctors, that be marketeers in the individual affiliates, to analyze, adjust, and deliver and improve on that level. Okay, so that was my 10-minute opening, and from here to get something to discuss. Paul?
Thank you so much, Morten. Really appreciate that. And I've actually decided that what we're going to do, based on the fact that you've just talked a little bit about the the global and local and the centralization and decentralization option is to actually just go straight into the next audience question before introducing Mike and Victor. So if you wouldn't mind looking at your screens again, we're going to ask you a third poll, which is all about this very topic. And I just want to see where you think your company actually is. So when you're managing a global customer communications portfolio, how is your company actually progressing? Is it moving towards a more centralized or a more decentralized situation? I think it'd be actually very interesting to see on a broad scale where the industry is going in this regard. So I'll give you a few more seconds to vote, as about a third of you have done. So I'll hold it open for 5 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's have a look at those results then, shall we? Right, so we've got pretty even spread, I would say, with a slight bias towards centralization. So I guess the first thing to say is that that's in contravention of where Morten hopes and expects the industry to eventually, as technology perhaps improves, as we're able to give more control and more power to our local affiliates and people on the ground. So I guess I want to, at this stage, invite Mike and Victor into the conversation. Mike Bellis from Pfizer is very much a friend and frequent collaborator with Eyeforpharma. In fact, I was with him in Miami the other day at our Latin American conference, and he delivered a great presentation there. And actually, some of the stories about the approaches that Mike has been using to change mindset within Pfizer Europe are very fascinating, and hopefully Mike can express those later on. Mike has been with Pfizer for about 5 years now, and before that he was climbing through the ranks at Sanofi over about a 6-year period. And Victor, of course, is with Sanofi now, where he's been for just over 2 years. And before that, I believe, was at Novartis for around 12 years, apart from a couple of years being spent on the agency side. I've only recently met Victor for the first time, but I've been very impressed with him in our conversations leading up to today's session. So very much looking forward to having you guys on board. So we're going to unmute everybody now, and I hope that that last poll provides a good talking point for us, because it's clearly, well, let me go back to Morten to begin with. Clearly, Morten, it's not the case that people are yet decentralizing, but that's very much what you predicted. Is that what you would have expected to have seen from the audience?
Yeah, it is actually, because I do have a feeling that right now it feels like 50-50 when I'm talking to the industry out there, that some are centralizing and some are decentralizing. I don't, as I probably could hear, I have no doubt that we need to, in order to personalize, we have to decentralize, but we're of course not going to have mavericks out there who's just going to make their own strategy. That's not what I mean by it. And I think that's where one of the places where the technology can set in to utilize both sides of this.
Okay, so if we're going to personalize, we have to decentralize, is something you said there. And also, Dominic Sloan has just asked a question, as I hope many of you will continue to do, who asks about whether or not there are significant financial barriers to decentralization, and whether that's the factor that's actually creating some malaise in the system. Let me go to Victor and see what you have to say about that, as somebody who's very much involved in this kind of thing.
Yeah, Paul, thanks a lot. So first of all, it's great to be here, and thank you for the invite. And I'm slightly on the other side of the fence from Morten, which I think will make the discussions a little bit more lively, because coming from a heavily regulated industry, such as pharmaceuticals, where we're in here, I'm not a huge fan of decentralization. And in one sense, I do agree with Morten that we have to decentralize to become a bit more personalized. But what I don't want us to lose sight of are all the different regulatory restrictions that we have to deal with. And from that perspective, I think a certain sense of centralization is absolutely necessary for us to move forward with. And the example that I will give you is a very, very simple one. I'm not going to go into any specific details regarding the company, but I was involved in a program where a particular campaign was launched in Portuguese focused only on Brazil. Now, as we know, the internet is certainly not local anymore. It's very much global. So when that campaign was launched, other country was identified as being, as part of the regulatory process. Corporate communication wasn't involved. And as it turns out, some of the messages that came out of this program were very contradictory to the FDA, to the EMEA, and to NICE. So what wound up happening is, the corporate communication department wound up receiving a call from the FDA and basically saying, what are you guys doing? Because of the decentralization, they had no idea what was going on, and it took a long time to sort the process out. In the meantime, there was all sorts of other issues that popped up. So from my perspective, we cannot lose sight of those types of things. So I think, when we are decentralizing, I still think there needs to be a core group of stakeholders that need to be centralized and be aware of what's going on.
Okay, so let's bring this to Mike. And Mike, you've obviously been in a process of trying to bring your company on board with a certain type of thinking. So where do you go with this?
I think it will make for a lively debate, and it's great to be part of it as well. So thanks again for asking me to be part of it. I'm probably at the furthest end of the scale towards decentralization, and I don't think that means necessarily creating communication. What I believe it means is taking the accountability from the center and giving it out to the people who have the most accountability for delivering the experience to their customers. Because those people at the front line are the people who are going to understand what it's like to be a customer. They're going to have the greatest amount of empathy. They're going to have the most immediacy to fix any problems where they exist, to make things relevant. And so while there has to be a regulated structure for communication, the accountability for the way that customers experience their interactions with brands, for me, should be held very closely to where those customers are. So that could be a local affiliate office. I think it should go further. It could be within regions within affiliates, or even down to individuals who are customer facing.
Okay, so Morten, given you've had two different perspectives there, how do you see this?
Well, I agree with both of them, if you can say, though. I think, obviously, yeah, we have to, I don't think it's contradicting each other, localizing and centralizing in this case, because I think that yeah, we need, in order to have everything under control, it needs to be centralized, approved, and have a repository of content, approved content, and so forth. But I also believe that we're going to need to give some tools and the skills further out for the local people, as Mike say, the region, the affiliate, all the way out to the rep or the doctor and the patient, to within this frame to put together. I think actually it starts not right now. It's like we're having a one-size-fits-all, right? That we have a push approach in everything we do. This is highly centralized from a lot of companies. The next step, I think, is going to be like menu-driven. That's going to be a combination of a push and a pull. That's going to be like Chipotle restaurant, where you can choose what you want to have in your food. And then eventually, I think it will move towards more of co-creation, but not co-creation in terms of the rep, for instance, just deciding to put together a presentation, but from obviously from something that has been approved. But my point is just saying, I don't think it's contradicting each other. I actually think we need to centralize, to localize, because we need to have an enormous repository of content and rules and so forth.
So Paul, it's Mike here. I think you framed the conversation by talking purely about communication, and the things that we say are not as valuable as the things that we do. And the things that we do are going to be the things which really deliver meaningful value to our customers, not just what we say. And so to give you an example of outside of our industry about how this works excellently is a brand that most people will recognize, which is the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. Now, a very high high premium brand for everyone who stayed there, incredibly expensive, but they have such a focus on the delivery of the experience that they create that they're able to justify that margin. Now, one of the things that they do, which is so fascinating to me, is that they give every single one of their customer-facing colleagues up to a budget of up to $200 a day to fix any problem that a customer has whatsoever. And it's done without needing to check with anybody else. It's done in a way which no colleague is questioned for spending the money. If they see a problem that a customer has of theirs, then they have $200, whatever it is, just to fix it. Now that, I think, is an incredible attitude and a culture which has been created, which is set from the top of the people who set that brand up. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should be able to give all of our customer-facing people $200 just to spend as they see fit to solve a customer problem. But if you take the principles of that, I wonder how we might be able to decentralize the accountability for the experience we provide customers to those people who deliver it, then I think we would start to have a more meaningful role within our customer's life.
Mike, this is Victor. I absolutely agree with you. The one point that I want to make here is that at some point, Ritz-Carlton came up with this strategy from a global perspective, right? So, and then they decentralized it, and I absolutely agree with you that the folks that are on the ground, the closest to the customers, know the customers the best. And global should not be driving those, localized strategies. However, there has to be a global strategy for an organization the size of, the Ritz, the size of Sanofi, the size of Pfizer, that has to push in a certain direction. And what I'm saying is that's where the centralization needs to be occurring. So, I guess to what Morten was saying, he agrees with both of us. I think we're all aiming towards the same point. But, I just don't want us to lose sight of, because if the organization is going without a rudder and it's completely disorganized or decentralized rather, then we're going to wind up missing the point again as well. So, I think the pendulum has to find sort of a middle ground, and and both sides have to be brought into focus there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a role for leadership in there, but the accountability one is, I think, still important. But yeah, it's a great point.
I want to just get a little bit more down to the nitty-gritty if we can. We're obviously talking about things from quite a macro level at the moment, but let's talk about the actual treatment pathway then. Let's talk about the actual focus that physicians and patients are going to have. As we attempt to become more customer experience focused and as we attempt to personalize, how are we going to engage the myriad different stakeholders? I mean, Victor, you've been involved in some quite complicated pathways and pipelines, so I'm very interested in what's your approach to actually take this forward.
Okay. I mean, yes, it can be a rather daunting prospect when you look at the overall picture. But, basically what, I do with my teams here is basically we really try to boil it down to some really high-level big objectives that we don't lose sight of as we progress forward. And what I mean by that is, like, first you have to understand the ecosystem that you're dealing with here. Who are the players? What are they doing? What are they saying? And make sure you listen actively, not just listen and be ready to answer, but listen to really hear what they're saying. So one of the first really practical and pragmatic things that we do on our side here that I've done within Novartis and also with Sanofi is any sort of digital or multi-channel campaign that I run, I really do an assessment of the market, through a variety of processes. The first, which is the easiest and most simplest, is really going into a social listening exercise. I pick out the markets, I pick out the demographics, I pick out, my sort of my therapeutic area, if you will, draw some parameters around that, among other couple things, and then just, engage a trusted vendor where I go in and really do a snapshot of the market. Who's saying what? Where are they saying? What are they looking for? And what do they need? And that really helps me to then formulate a truly multi-channel strategy that can address, the various stakeholders along the pathway, but really kind of come in there with a sort of a closed-loop marketing approach. So, I can go into much more detail on that if you want to, but, let me know where I should, let me know what the boundaries are there, if you will.
Well, Victor, I'd quite appreciate if you could maybe explain sort of on a structural level what you've actually put in place. I was reading a book last week called The E-Myth. I think quite a few people have heard of it, which actually made an interesting recommendation within it. It actually recommended that a company should ensure that it can operate with the least intelligent set of employees that it possibly can, because the system is set up in the right way to ensure that it still functions as it should. And any company that relies permanently on super intelligent staff just simply doesn't have the ability to resource itself for the long-term future. So I'm just, bearing that in mind, what is the system that you've actually been able to deploy at Sanofi, and is it foolproof? Is it something that's going to stand the test of time?
That's a very interesting comment, and I certainly won't come back to saying that we set low standards and then fail to achieve them, because that's certainly not the case.
No, that's not what I meant. What I meant was, what have you done to ensure that your structure and your systems are...
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. No, I absolutely understand what you're saying. So no stress there. No, but you're absolutely right. I mean, I think it's just, putting together sort of a process and an engagement strategy that will be received and understood, by every common denominator is the absolute goal, but what we're trying to do here is really bring a balance of not providing too much detail, thereby overwhelming some of your stakeholders and some of your customer and consumer base, and then also not providing not enough detail where you're boring another market segment. So finding that fine line is quite important. And again, the important thing here is really understanding your target audience. Who's online, who's taking your medicines, what are the challenges that they're facing, and what are their demographics. Because building sort of, a strategy or a communication process or any sort of personalization process to the least common denominator may completely miss your target audience. And so what we have done within Sanofi, and what we have also done again within in Novartis prior, was really build a strong centralized process at a global level. So that strong centralized process at the global level will hopefully allow enough flexibility at the local levels to make sure that there's adaptability and there is a certain amount of flexibility to those people that really understand what's going on with their customer and stakeholder base to be addressed that most effectively. So to get really pragmatic and tactical with you, we have to focus on brand equity. So as long as we continue to maintain a global sense of brand equity and have a certain amount of tools that are developed based on the social listening that we do, based on the market research that we do, we have those core components in place. We then build, whether it's an application, whether it's a website, whether it's generic content or unbranded content that's been generated, we put that into a centralized system that we call the EMS. It's a enterprise marketing system, and then from there it's almost like a digital library where whatever project we're working on is cataloged. It's incorporated into the organization at every level, and then available within the organization at every level. So when you're going into this, say you're launching a brand on diabetes, or say you're doing any sort of thing on diabetes, you go into this system, you choose to see what has already been done within the diabetes area, branded or non-branded, and then you pick and choose the actual components that complement or more clearly, not so much complement, but really address the needs of what your target audience or what your market is really requesting, and then build out towards that. So it's a very centralized process at the global level again, but very much decentralized, and you can pick and choose what you want at the local levels. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that does help. We're getting some good questions coming in, and thank you very much to everybody who is doing that. Please do continue to throw your ideas and questions in. A couple of people picking up on the social listening point. Some people talking about the almost standard argument with this, of course, with the adverse event reports that will naturally come in as a result. But also some people saying it's simply not enough. It's only one channel, emphasizing only those that are actually already engaged with their illness and obviously using digital. But actually we need to try and target a much broader range of people within the target population. I don't know whether or not, Victor, I don't think you're going to deny either of those things as being important. But if it's all right, I want to move on to Mike and Morten and to see what they have to say on this topic.
So particularly on social listening?
Well, no, also in terms of the structure, going back to what I asked Victor a second ago, in terms of how you believe that you can ensure the right framework is in place so that indeed customer experience is not something that relies on just a couple of wonderful individuals, but is embedded within the company.
Yes. Well, the approach that we're taking here is one which I'm delighted to say we're starting to get some nice traction with. And the principles of it are simple, and they would need to be simple for it really to gain traction. Not because of the reasons you've necessarily explained before, to say you've got to design them for stupid people. It's just on the basis that we have very, very capable people here. We have very capable people. But the simpler that something is, the easier it is to do it. The more scope and the greater adoption you will get. Now, the simple things that we try and do are as following. The first one is to develop greater empathy with our customers, not just an understanding of their names or where they live or the jobs they have or some of their goals, but really to get a sense of what it feels like to be them. Now, that's so important as a starting point, because that empathy, that feeling that you have for them, is probably the single biggest factor which will drive continued behavior. It's something that people will reflect upon, and it will be, I think, one of the greatest sources of choices, of making decisions which will help to create value for customers. So that's something we put a lot of emphasis on, is customer empathy. The second thing then is customer journey mapping and metrics associated to it. So as opposed to, say, mapping, say, a patient flow and looking at the touch points where products might be used, or perhaps activity cycles, which are something which are slightly different again. If we are able to map the journeys that customers take in order to achieve the things that they want to achieve, especially when we're looking at the management of patients, then we can start to use our empathy to understand how we can play a meaningful role in delivering value at each key stage in that journey. Now, once we have that mapped out, we've got the best idea and an approach to how we might then go about delivering our role that we want to deliver to them. But what's so essential to bring it all to life is having a feedback mechanism which allows us to tell us how good a job we're doing at each of those key stages. Now, that needs to take the form of two parts. First of all would be the customer feedback mechanism, and asking them, really, are we doing a good job for you? Are we giving you the value that you expect from us? And expectation here is everything. Are we setting their expectation? Are we delivering against that expectation? The second part then, I said there's two components to the feedback. The second part, which is equally as important, is having employee feedback aligned back to those key stages of the journey. Asking colleagues, do you think we're doing a good job? Do you think there's anything we can do better to deliver value to customers? Often they, through their interactions, will pick up nuance, subtlety, and be able to suggest different ways of approaching a similar piece of work, which those subtle changes might make a very big difference in the way that a customer perceives them, and as a result deliver significant competitive advantage. Within all of that, of course, is engagement, and we will not be able to do any of these things of delivering value through key stages in customer journeys unless we have people engaged in the work that we are looking to do. So we give an awful lot of focus to colleague engagement, but also customer engagement. We're all people, being colleagues or customers, but all of us need to be engaged in order to deliver an experience that we want to deliver.
Okay, that's very interesting.
So fairly high level and conceptual there, but
just a couple of things. Sorry, just quickly. Sorry, Victor. Before I give it over to you, a couple of people want to just clarify with what Mike's saying. Some people are saying, is it necessary to create customer journey maps for every segment and create a better experience across the whole suite of people that we have? And then some people are saying, well, we need to ensure that we're mapping every different stakeholder out there. It's absolutely important. We can't just focus on the patients. We can't just focus on the HCP. It's important. So I just want to clarify how broad you're going with this.
Really good questions. Really good questions. And the short answer is it depends. I'm afraid the longer answer is keep it as practical and as simple as possible. If you can't use it, if you can't bring it to life, then there's no point doing it. So we tend to do customer journeys for segments of customers where they make sense. So there tend to be very similar customer journeys for types of customers across Europe, which is the region I cover. So the work that, say, for example, a cardiologist does in managing their patients, the stages in their journey are broadly pretty similar in the UK as they would be in Germany, as they would be in Italy or elsewhere. There may be differences that you would need to tease out to make sure you're mapping the right journey. But very broadly, in the experience that I have had in doing this over the last 2 years or so, we found there are an awful lot of similarities within the segments we've chosen.
Okay, sorry, and sorry for interrupting. I think that was Victor who was coming back in there, was it?
Yeah, no, thank you, Paul. And Mike, I mean, great stuff. I absolutely am 100% agreement with you. I mean, I think, you know, we tried to take it a little bit further, and, you know, again, going back to the question that just came back here with the segmentation, you know, we really tried to push to make a distinction, to draw a distinction between the customer and the consumer. And, you know, because they obviously fall into two very different buckets, and, you know, and how you treat the personalization aspect, you know, towards, you know, these two sort of segments is widely different. And, you know, so that's one part in there. So we're really trying to focus along those two big paths. And, of course, there's the caregiver down the line and the payers and, you know, and things of that sort. But then going back to your bit about feedback, there's two sort of maybe points that I want to make and potentially raise a question, because one of the biggest challenges that I have been facing on this side here is with regards to feedback, legal and regulatory prohibit us to, or really limit us in terms of how much feedback we can get, especially from the consumer, from the patient. And you know, that's been a massive challenge, you know, and then trying to work out an ROI that goes along with that to really see how you're progressing and how you know, this particular experience is being successful or not has been another huge challenge to that. So, you know, maybe, you know, I mean, Paul, I don't want to derail the conversation, but I mean, that's something maybe that Mike or Morten can talk about very briefly as well.
Yeah, and I'd also like to invite the audience to throw in some suggestions on that one. So if you can add into the question and answer box whether or not you have any particularly smart solutions, it'd be interesting to get an audience perspective. We'll keep your replies anonymous. And I'd be really interested to hear what the audience thinks about how they can create this kind of feedback system that doesn't create all of these regulatory and AE style hurdles, and whether or not anybody has got good answers to that. But Morten, we haven't heard from for a while. So Morten, have you got anything to say here? And maybe coming from a technology angle, there's some possibilities as well.
Yeah, maybe. What I was thinking, just saying that I think personalization. I think the big thing here, the big difference is that that is about giving people what they need or what they think they need, and not so much what we want them to have, if you follow me, right? That and I think that with a lot of the things we're talking about here and what we can do with the technology is that we can make much greater segmentation, meaning that if we in the old days had to have 5 segments, we can now have 1 million. But it doesn't change that it's still, in my view, not personalized. Being personalized is when it's turned around. It's when the customer says, whether that's the doctor or the patient or whatever, this is my worries or this is what I can't do, and so forth, and then we answer to that. And I think that for me, I like to say 2 things. I think that the big thing here is that the industry, I think, if this is what we want to do, we're going to have to change the way we do things, because that technology is not going to do that. As long as we're doing 5 campaigns a year, even if we turn that out to 100 campaigns a year, it's still going to be kind of a push, which is not, and not that I'm against push. Push is fine but it's not personalized, if you follow me. So I think that's one thing. That we need to have people, everybody, whether it's a doctor, patient, or whatever, to kind of put them on some kind of an adoption ladder, saying, what are their worries here? Is it because they haven't realized they need to change their treatment? Is it because they haven't realized what kind of category of treatment they should use, and so forth? That's one thing. The other thing I like to say is that I think that this industry has an enormous potential with the customers we have now, meaning that the ones who really knows the patients are the doctor. The one who knows the doctor is the rep, and so forth. And if we can tap into that, if we can say that, well, let me help you as a doctor to communicate better with your patients, then I think we get somebody who are that much closer to the patient, who knows what is the problem, and can put a valuable communication together. Because I think today we just have to realize that what we're communicating today, if we look at what we do with the reps, it's just not valuable enough. I mean, if we can get like 5 minutes in front of a doctor, even though we come for free and we maybe even bring lunch, and they still don't want to hear of what we're saying, it's just not valuable enough. And I think that is exactly because that it's not relevant, because it's relevant for us and we think it's relevant for them, but it's apparently not relevant enough. And the only way to turn that one around is to change the conversation and say, what is your problem, and let me see to what extent I can mend that, or I can help you with that.
Okay, so Mike, there's an interesting challenge, isn't there? Really turning that push to a pull and ensuring that we indeed are treating our customers as they would wish to be treated. I mean, you've talked, and I mentioned earlier that you've been running some workshops at Pfizer to try and change attitude, but how do you ensure, as Morten just said, that this is not about just a different style of communication? This is about actually, and Morten actually covered this in his presentation when he talked about companies like Uber and removing the middleman. This is about a different product proposition, isn't it? And how do we, how do you, get empower internal staff to actually be able to deliver on that level?
Well, it takes time, I think, is the first point. But changing mindset is really the goal. If you're able to change the mindset, then behaviors will indeed follow. Now, we have, across the industry, really a victim of our own success in many ways, in that we've had some very, very good times as a result of the business models we've adopted, as a result of the technologies we've had, which have solved some very significant problems for our customers. Really, really valuable assets which have solved problems. Now, we may not have those kind of solutions that we used to have anymore, at least not that's going to generate the revenues that we used to. And so we're now going to have to start to think about how can we provide more value. Now, I think a fundamental change, which I'm starting to notice in the conversations I'm having, is in that we are starting to recognize that a reach and frequency business model, or a reach and frequency strategy, which is one that most pharma organizations have built on the last decade or so, is not one that is going to continue our success. Reach and frequency, of course, meaning saying the same thing, usually, lots of times to our target audience. Now, that, I know, it works up to a point, especially in launch phases, and it does have a role. But after that, what do we do? And I think from changing the conversation from reach and frequency to one which is more about acquisition and retention, customer acquisition and customer retention. How will we acquire our customers? How will we retain them as customers? Will then start to provoke different choices that teams are making. As inherent within those questions are, how are we going to give them value through our interactions so that they want to remain loyal with us? And that is one of the areas where I've started to see one of the biggest changes in the work that I'm doing.
Okay. We've only got a few minutes left. I want to ask the panel today to just really give us some practical next steps. I mean, with these conversations, I mean, we could carry on for the next 2 hours, but unfortunately, we've all got busy lives, and we need to focus on what to do. What you believe that if you were bringing somebody else perhaps into your organization to replace you, what would be the specific practical steps that you would give them in order to ensure that their success continued? So, Victor, if you wouldn't mind answering that, that'd be great.
Yeah, okay, I'll start it off. So, well, first of all, I mean, Mike, you raised some very excellent points, and Paul, if I may, just want one thing that I want to add to that. The content, the value, and the services that are being provided, in terms of what the people are, or what our customers and consumers are looking for, is one thing. But we cannot forget, where are they looking for this? There's a ton of information out there in a ton of different places. So it's very critical for us to remember, not only do we have to stay innovative and clear in terms of the value and services and content that we provide, but we also have to understand where to most effectively serve it up. So, that's been one of the learnings, the great learnings that I've had over my, the course of my career, because, you can put it out in many different places and it just doesn't resonate. So that's that point. To your question then, if somebody was replacing me, there's a very simple plan that I follow in terms of a transition piece. One is create and follow a very simple internal strategy process, okay? So whatever strategy you create, to whatever customer experience, market segment you have, can everyone within your organization relate to it, repeat it, and understand it without having to pull up a presentation or anything of that sort? So, Victor with the digital and multi-channel marketing team focuses on three things. He focuses on training internal people on digital and multi-channel. He focuses on, providing and monetizing digital and multi-channel support to brands, and he focuses on innovation. And then along those three key pillars, come up with a handful of targeted SOPs that are, again, very useful to your internal audience. So, for example, in Sanofi's case, you have a 110,000 strong workforce. You get that kind of momentum behind that workforce, and you can achieve anything you want. So that's my sort of, practical sense for this particular webinar.
Thank you very much, Victor. And Morten, have you got any recommendations for people?
Yeah, I think first of all that to change this is not done by technology. It's really because the way that we work today in the industry is very siloed. So what we look at is saying that I got that experience that we've got 4 areas that we have to look at. The skill set, obviously, of not just on everybody. I mean, on the brand people, on the sales reps, on IT. We've got to get everybody to kind of think a little bit different, not completely different, but a little bit different. There's some processes that need to be changed because if, as I said, if we are now running campaigns, if that's the way of thinking, then that's not going to be that's not going to work. We're going to have to think much more on adoption ladder and so forth. Then we got the so basically 4 things. There's the infrastructure, the unique technology, the skills, the processes, and the content. Starting making content that is valuable for the downstream, for the patient. If we're going to give the doctor tools to help the patients, for instance. So that's one thing. And then the big thing, I think, is to say that what we've kind of experienced so far is to say that this has to be, it's very difficult to do this in bites, if you follow me. You have to do this as a full circle, meaning that I think it's very difficult to take a whole company and change it in that way. I think that's going to take a very long time because there are something that really are disruptive, I think, in a way of thinking. So what we've experienced is that when we do it as you can say, more of a what I call a Navy SEAL approach, that you take one product, one brand, whatever, in one country, one district, and so forth, but you take it as a concentrated, small scale but full circle solution, and then once you got the experience from that one, then you can start leverage to that.
Well, thank you very much. Believe it or not, we're actually up on our hour, and I'm going to have to say thank you very much to our speakers who've given up their time today. I want to just quickly share with you Morten's contact details. He's been very kind to share those with us, and if you have a look at your screen, if you want to follow up with him, learn more about Rainmaker, which is Agnitio's multi-channel communication solution, you can get in touch with him directly on the details just there that you can see. I'll give you a few seconds to copy that down. But obviously, huge thanks to Victor and to Mike for their contribution as well. Absolutely fascinating. It's very clear that we could talk for a long time. And in fact, that's very much what Eyeforpharma, what I myself want to do. This is definitely not the end of the conversation, because actually we're just today announcing that we're launching 2 new conferences. One's taking place in London for a European audience, and the other one is in Philadelphia for the North American audience. And if this is the sort of conversation that you find yourself very engaged with and you can learn a lot from, then you can actually have a look at a couple of links that we're going to put into your chat box down in the bottom right corner of your screen right now. And that will allow you to get some more information on certainly the European event that we're doing. I think the US one might be launching very shortly. And you know, the power of having these types of conversations, as hopefully you've just witnessed over the last hour, is really quite strong. If what one of the things that you're grappling with is actually the mindset and entrenchment within your firm, because it's amazing how strong group thinking can be when it comes to mindset change. We've seen many examples throughout history of where that kind of group mindset has been used for both good and bad. And of course, we obviously aim for good. It can be an incredibly effective way of getting colleagues on board. Now, this might sound like I'm just trying to get you to buy conference tickets, but it's my personal motivation to ensure that our industry becomes more valuable and more open. And I believe that we have to move beyond just learning and networking with conferences, and really about creating more of a movement, something that we can talk about on a mass scale, that we're improving customer experience, customer mindset, and obviously our own mindset, if we're ever going to repair the huge trust issues that we have in our industry and actually make it a better situation for all of us. So do try and have a look at those things. Put in your details if you want to be one of the first to get hold of the brochure for the conferences. Do follow up with Morten and Agnitio if you want them to arrange a free online consultancy session for you, discuss your specific situation and your own challenges, and do obviously keep in tune with Eyeforpharma. We'll obviously be trying to ensure that a lot more insights are gained from people like Mike and Victor in the future. I'm really sorry we haven't been able to get to everybody's questions. We had a bit of a late surge there in the last 5 minutes. I think I had a good 50 or 60 questions suddenly arrive, which is slightly annoying, but what we might be able to do is to get some follow-up messages and answers from our people right now. And obviously LinkedIn could be useful for that too. So I want to say thank you again to everybody for joining us. Really appreciate it, and obviously we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.